No one loves attention more than politicians, but even they think it's gone too far.
So why could restricting what politicians can say be a good thing for politics?
From the Attention Practice and Phonogram, this is the podcast all about the attention economy. Welcome to Can We Have Your Attention? Have you seen The Odyssey yet?
I haven't seen The Odyssey. I should see The Odyssey, really. I mean, again, films, right? Haven't seen anything. Terrible cultural wasteland that I am. But no, I haven't seen it. Have you seen it, and did you like it?
I've seen it twice.
Okay. Is that good?
Yes, I think so. So my favorite film of the year so far is actually Project Hail Mary. Shout out Project Hail Mary. But this is the film of the year, I think, for a variety of reasons. But one of those reasons being that it's surprising to me how much The Odyssey is cut through in like every conceivable way into both our social media diets or social diets. And then also, you know, it's been a success at the cinema as well. But the marketing around it has absolutely just, I don't know how the actors are alive. One of the friends of the show sent me a link to an article about the touring schedule and about the promotional schedule that the actors in The Odyssey have had to endure for this to make it work. And it's really, really punishing. I don't know how the industry survives in the future on it, but it's really interesting to watch that change in marketing. But anyway, The Odyssey is exceptionally good. I highly recommend going to the cinema. And if you can see it in IMAX, do, because it does make a difference. This is a mini spoiler, but I don't know how they're ever going to film another urban warfare scene again the same way. But just any big screen will do. Any big gigantic screen will do. And also don't drink so much when you're there.
Because?
3 hours long.
Oh, 3 hours long. Yeah. They should bring back rest breaks, I think, in the middle of films. Didn't that used to be a thing? You used to be able to get little ice cream tubs and everything. When
I was watching The Odyssey in IMAX, I did have a moment where I was like, if this was a play, there'd be an interval.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to go and watch it, The Odyssey, but unfortunately, the Test cricket season is underway again. So priorities elsewhere, as they say. Anyway, that's enough about us. Let's talk about politics, just to make everybody excited on their summer holidays.
I mean, I can try to connect it back to The Odyssey because that is a film about politics and lies and storytelling and campaigning. But yes, we're here to talk about politics today, but not just any old politics, actually. There will be no count bin face, unfortunately, although I did enjoy that a lot. It's just for the media. I mean, watching a bin do a political campaign. I live for this stuff, James.
Only in Britain. I mean, would you get that in the States?
No. I mean, no. I think
people take it more seriously, or because I think we take it like politics relatively seriously. But it's a classic.
I think there's a bit more civic earnestness in the US, certainly. But I also think in the UK, you have a very established system and you also have very centralized media. You know, one of the debates that we always have here is about inclusion and about representation of regions, right? In the US, you actually it's like 7 countries, right? It's not one central media system, which is also why sports franchises are so interesting to look at, because it's all tied to the media system. But anyway, because you have these localized media systems, your politics is just different as well. And you also have more elected offices or forms of elected office. So I think if you do have joke candidates, it's very hard to see how they cut through. Anything that is a little bit jokey or joke-like, I don't think it's deliberate usually. It's changing now with sort of meme politics, but you don't get that sort of satirical political engagement that you get in the UK. There are no bins running for Senate in the US, right?
No.
There's no.
So this was Count Binface who ran against Nigel Farage in the Clacton by-election, which had been called by Nigel Farage in the first place.
He's an intergalactic space rubbish bin.
Indeed, and came up with some interesting policies as well during the course of this. And obviously he wasn't
nationalize Adele.
It's fantastic. We can all get behind that. But, you know, he wasn't particularly trying to get the attention of the people of Clacton, I think, in an earnest attempt to get elected. But political advertising is what we're talking about today. So let's start with that. What did you think of his attempts to talk to people in Clacton? And secondly, let's talk about what we're talking about today.
I personally didn't go to Clacton, so I didn't, being not a journalist. So haven't spoken to anyone from Clacton, but I did follow with interest the stories of people who'd gone to Clacton and interviewed people in Clacton who just seemed exhausted and a bit fed up with the whole thing. But I did think it was interesting the way that, well, one, I mean, he got, 9,000 votes? That's crazy. So for 25% of the entire vote count in a by-election went to a man dressed as a bin wearing a cape, whose main policy was to nationalize a Dow and build one affordable home. I think that it's actually kind of staggering to think about it. And considering how much that went through, I think that's remarkably successful. I mean, he got his deposit back at least. The second was that the things that he did choose to talk to and talk about, I mean, I was very surprised to see he did an interview with The Rest is Politics. Yeah. The Rest is Politics having him on. I think that was the right thing to do, because this whole election was extraordinary. But I also think the way that they went about interviewing him, like you could see they were of two minds. Rory Stewart absolutely loved it, was just so excited, encouraging it. But Alistair Campbell, I think, did make an attempt to go. I think he was a little annoyed, actually, listening to him interview Count Binface, because he was not because he thought that he was angry at having to interview a bin, but because he was angry that Count Binface wasn't taking it more seriously. He genuinely thought he could win. He was like, look, if you actually put the effort in this, you could get elected. And then what you choose to do with that is a different thing altogether. But there's a potential to have a serious message in here if you have a serious message about politics and the way we campaign in the UK and the way we run our election campaigns, run our political life, our civic life. That is, having people like Count Binface running these sorts of campaigns is a good way to change that in some ways. And, if he took it that little bit more seriously, or thought a little bit more about, okay, right, how do you actually put together a manifesto? How do you actually attract votes, attract the people of Clacton, not just media attention to this? What can you do to change politics? And so that segues very nicely into our guest.
Indeed, who's Alex Tait from Reform Political Advertising. Just tell us, if you will, a little bit about something to put the whole thing into context for people, because I think before we talk about political advertising, we need to talk a bit about the advertising standards in the UK, don't we? So just explain why we've got Alex on, and then why, what it is about advertising standards people need to know.
So to put this into context, Reform Political Advertising, number one, has nothing to do with the Reform Party, and number two, actually predates them, which tells you how long it takes to change a law. So Reform Political Advertising was founded by Alex Tait and Benedict Pringle, who are both veterans of the advertising industry in different ways. And they founded the campaign after Brexit. So Brexit was the galvanizing force for this, because if you work in advertising, every ad that you make is, in the UK at least, or is going to be aired in the UK, or shown to UK consumers in some format, is regulated by something called the Advertising Standards Authority. So they enforce something called the CAP Code, which is the Committee of Advertising Practices. And it's a very strong and strongly regulated code of advertising practices. It's self-regulation from the advertising industry, but it actually works. And then on TV, it's co-regulation with Ofcom. So it's in conjunction with Ofcom on TV. Everything else is self-regulation. And you cannot place an ad in the UK or be an advertiser unless you agree to adhere to the Advertising Standard Authority, the CAP code. And that code has a number of standards, but the main one is that ads have to be truthful. You can't lie. You cannot lie in advertising. And it can't just be like honest gov, it's fine. You have to provide evidence of every claim you submit. So if you say, I worked on Fairy Liquid, for example, we've talked about this a number of times, but I always go back to it because they were very careful about adhering to the Advertising Standards Authority's codes. Those claims they put on their bottles, so 5 times, 4 times, 2 times the number of dishes it cleans, the amount of evidence they had to supply to substantiate that number would, I think, blow most people's minds. You have to go through lab tests. You have to show that it's repeatable. You have to show that what the conditions were, how you measured what a plate was. Like they had to have standardized size of plates, and they had to be able to repeat the test multiple times. And that is any claim you put on anything, right? Like any number, anything you say to a consumer has to be validated. It has to be something you can validate. And if you don't do that, you get in trouble. You get fined. You might get banned from becoming an advertiser. In extreme circumstances, your company might be banned from advertising altogether, potentially. And then there's other parts of that too, like it has to be legal, it has to be decent, it has to be truthful, honest. You can't just say stuff, right? And these codes have been running a really long time. And as a result, they've created an advertising, let's call it an advertising environment, in which every ad that British people see is subject to this code, and to a large part adheres to it. And when it doesn't, it gets pulled. There's people who stretch it and break it all the time. But generally speaking, actually, the ads that you see are ones that adhere to that code, and they're the strongest in the world. So as a result, people tend to trust advertising. They might not always believe it. They might be skeptical. They might be skeptical of brands, but actually underneath, people really do trust ads in the UK. And I think that has had a halo effect on other kinds of ads, right? When people see information, whether it comes through their door in the form of a leaflet, whether it's something that appears on the side of a bus or at a tube stop or on television, people tend to believe the claims, no matter what it is. Now, if you're a commercial advertiser, you adhere to this code, but not all advertising does. And the one form of advertising that doesn't need to adhere to this code is political advertising to date.
Let's get Alex to explain a bit more.
We're a campaign that's advocating for factual accuracy and transparency in election advertising, quite simply.
I mean, it's amazing to me that doesn't already exist. I imagine at some point you saw an advert and went, hold on, that's not right.
I think it was a combination of things, actually. We're quite unusual in this whole space, I think, in the campaigning space around democracy, in that we're all from advertising and marketing backgrounds. So I don't think it was one particular ad, but certainly a culmination of events. And just before I started Reform Political Advertising, I'd done a number of different roles at different brands, including the media director at Unilever across all of its brands. And we're just really very aware of the fact that when you need to advertise a packet of crisps or a pack of sausages, you've got 4 sets of rules to ensure that an ad's accurate. And actually the most important ad of all, an ad that influences your vote, has got none. And yeah, I think it was certainly around the time of Trump 1.0 and a number of different events that happened around that time that it just came to our notice, really, just how crackers a situation it is and how something needed to be done about it.
I just wonder if you can give me an idea of just how far people can push the envelope at the moment in terms of what they're saying. I mean, are there any rules at all that govern political advertising? Or can people just literally say what they want to?
So from a content point of view, you can't be defamatory, as there's a rule against that. But apart from that, you have no rules at all to ensure factual accuracy. And actually, people are aware of, it's one of the things that's kept this campaign going, I think, over the years. People are aware of very sort of big, iconic ads, the few that make it into the press and into the headlines, maybe like the Brexit bus, for example. But as we've been running this event over the last 8 years, we've been reviewing election ads as a part of a proof point, really, to show what a problem it is. And to be honest, our elections are full of misleading ads that are influencing votes. It could be down to, at a very small level, misleading bar charts and the manipulation of statistics and data, through to the use of deepfake and AI more recently.
So I think a lot of our listeners won't actually know what the advertising standards in the UK are. So you were the media director at Unilever. Can you describe what that process would be like if you were trying to advertise a bottle of shampoo?
There's a lot of rules, actually. If you look at the CAP code and the BCAP code that govern advertising via the ASA, one of the things you need to do,
which is the Advertising Standards Authority, for anyone who's
quite. You'll certainly have to substantiate any claims that you make. And there's a process called pre-clearance, actually, for TV ads. Really quite a significant amount of rules governing different sectors or different types of advertising for different types of advertisers. But yeah, the fact that you've got none at all for election ads is something actually the public aren't aware of. So, we've done over the years research with different sort of polling companies like YouGov and Opinium as well. And I think one of the bits of research we did a few years ago showed that 65% of the UK actually think that election ads are regulated. And I think I would probably argue that indicates that misleading ads could almost be more effective, I think, by the fact that there's that kind of lingering assumption there. And I suppose a build on that really is that from research we've done over the years, we've probably done it about 3 or 4 times now, quite consistently, by far the majority, that 8 or 9 out of 10 people think that there should be rules and around factual accuracy in election ads.
It's one of those things that I was surprised to find out when you first wrote about it and when Benedict was blogging about it and you set up your organization. And as you're talking, I'm wondering almost whether part of the reason people believe there's already rules enforced is because there are such strict rules, self-regulation of the ad industry in the UK for brands. When I worked on brand advertising, we used to joke that if you could get it through the UK, you could get it through anywhere because the rules are so strict. And what that did to build brand trust is, politics is almost riding on the coattails of that.
Possibly, yeah. But again, there's ad standards in most countries around the world, really. And one of the things we've discovered, actually, and we've been pointing out to politicians that we've met up with and been talking to over the last couple of years, is that there are precedents for this in a number of other countries as well. So New Zealand has had electoral ad content regulation. So the rules that govern what's in an ad for decades, with all the parties brought into the process. And one of their last general elections, there were 100 ads that were upheld by the ASA in a process that works quite well. And some people say, well, that's a smaller country. Is that comparable? There's a couple of states in Australia as well that have rules for content regulation as well. And some moves by an MP, Zali Steggall, who's been looking to introduce it federally and has tried to introduce 2 bills in Australia. So it seems to me, I think, when you look across the world, there are, different countries that different rules would be suited to. But there's definitely the wider move to understand how we've got to a bit of a tipping point around disinformation and how disinformation is impacting elections, where just steps need to be taken. And politicians are waking up, I think, in different countries to that now.
So what is it exactly that you want? We talk about regulation, but of what? Because I think most people, when they think about political advertising, will think about the party political broadcasts. They'll think about posters, but are there other things going on that political parties are using? I mean, social media posts, anything else like that you think also should come in under these regulations?
Yeah, there's 4 things that we're advocating, and actually our campaign's evolved into a point of action now where we've got amendments for a bill going through Parliament called the Representation of the People Bill that's supported by quite a number of cross-party MPs, and the recommendations for these amendments have between 37 and 58 MPs supporting them. One of them is what we've just been talking about. So it's rules for factual claims in election advertising. And again, that came about really by us looking really to implement the recommendation of the House of Lords Democracy and Digital Technologies Committee. So we gave evidence to it in 2020. And out of many recommendations in that, number 1 was factual claims in election ads. The second thing we're advocating is for there to be transparency and an independent database of election ads. So I suppose that's to combat the topic of and the problem of dark advertising that came to prominence in the Brexit campaign.
Can you just explain what you mean by that, dark advertising specifically?
Yeah, so it's ads that are seen by the audience that aren't open to scrutiny by the general public. So if, again, for people that were following some of the advertising communications around the Brexit debate, there were various ads that were targeted saying, for example, Turkey is about to leave the EU, through to the EU wants to get rid of your teapot, literally. And, those were ads that were hyper targeted, so targeted to specific audiences that I think the people that put them together felt it would resonate with, that wasn't open to public scrutiny by journalists, the public, academics, or anyone else. Kind of from that point, some of the ad platforms put together ad libraries. So Meta's got quite a good user-friendly ad library. But what we're advocating is an independent ad database that would house all those digital ads to ensure that all of those are open to public scrutiny and accountability. And actually, it's really heartening to see that this idea that we put forward for an independent database for the fake news and disinformation inquiry in 2018 is now due to come into force across the whole EU this year. Point 3 is in the era that we're in around sort of deep fake and AI campaigning, which is now sort of obviously the sort of topic on everyone's lips from a campaign and advertising point of view in the UK, is to put some rules in place and actually to put a consultation in place to ensure that there are rules to stop the impersonation via AI of candidates and in an election period. And I think a really good example of this was George Freeman, the Conservative MP, who came to our event in October, who basically woke up, I think, towards the end of last year to his phone going into meltdown because lots of people were curious as to why he was defecting to Reform. And of course, he wasn't at all. It was just a very realistic sort of representation of him announcing that went viral. So that's the third one. And then the fourth recommendation is something that probably seems a small thing, actually, but I think is important. I'll give you an example as to why it is, which is to ensure that imprints, so the small bit of copy you get at the bottom of a leaflet, for example, has to state the political party. So an example why that's important is if you go back to one of the last London mayoral elections that we had, there were enormous amounts of leaflets sent around London by the Conservative candidate, Sean Bailey, one purporting to be from TfL and another one from City Hall, both attacking Sadiq Khan. Nowhere on it did it have a mention of the Conservative Party. It had a tiny piece of copy that most people, of course, would ignore, which was the imprint at the bottom of the leaflets that went out. But nowhere on it did it have to mention the Conservative Party. So it's obviously important, like, who said it from a transparency point of view. But I think what wraps some of these amendments all together is it's also equally important what is being said, as well as who is saying it, which I think sometimes lost when people think about the priorities around how communications works and what needs to be done to tackle it.
Yeah, I think it's quite a common tactic as well. I mean, I get a number of leaflets through my door, and it's only since talking to you about this have I realized what these are that purport to be from my local council, but they're actually from my local Conservative Party. And some of them are trying to get whoever's reading it to fill out an online form or a survey or a questionnaire, basically free political research or something along those lines. But it's incredibly misleading. I hadn't realized until I spoke to you that that's what that was. You would miss it. And I'm a pretty educated, well-informed voter and someone who works in communications.
And that's kind of how advertising works, isn't it, really? A lot of it's subconscious. Yeah. So it's not all about you sitting there and sort of fact-checking in your head a communication. A lot of this stuff, just the reach and frequency of it can really alter the public discourse in quite tightly run contests. And I think that's one of the things we've really tried to draw out. So one of the things that we've done in the run up to these amendments being discussed in the third reading of the bill that's going through Parliament is some analysis into the last elections that happened in May, into the local elections. And we kind of wanted to do that because for some years now, we've been analysing and showing and evidencing misleading ads. But we wanted to sort of look at, actually, in the new 5-party system that we've got, like, what impact does that have? Intuitively, I think it feels to us that elections are a lot closer. But our analysis really, I think we were quite flabbergasted, actually, by what it showed us. It showed that out of the sample that we looked at, which was all of the UK council elections in a sample from Democracy Club, which is a very comprehensive record of how people voted and which parties they voted for in the local elections. 42% of all of the wards were what some people would classify as being marginal, so won by 5% or less. And 9 wards were won by 1 vote. And actually, if you look at that over the last couple of years, you can see how much in this 5 or 6-party system that we're in now, you can see how close some of these elections are. And when you've got really a very significant amount of elections being won by a handful of votes, it's all very well saying, well, how much of an impact does advertising really have? Do we really need to do this? Is it on the priority list? One of the things we really wanted to do, and your readers can kind of see this on our website if they go to reformpoliticaladvertising.org, was to look at some of those close run contests and just show and surface some of the misleading ads that were running in them. And we got some great examples really across the parties, like Conservative, Reform, Liberal Democrat and Labour examples in that bit of analysis, really just to underline how it's got beyond, I think, a sort of nice to have to being a fundamental to democracy, actually, where advertising isn't the biggest driver of how someone votes. It's not the biggest driver of why someone buys a shampoo from Tesco, but it certainly can influence votes to that extent. And it seems to have picked up a lot of interest and traction in a lot of the MPs that we've got behind this and some of the news coverage we've got behind that report.
I'm interested as well in getting that MP support. I think what James and I were flabbergasted to discover is that this isn't already a law, right?
Yeah.
And you've been involved in that process. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because I think for a lot of people who feel this way about just different things in general, so whether it's social media bans or whatever it is, what's the process that you go through from getting from idea to campaign to law, and what do you have to do in that?
You're talking like your background of a campaign strategist, as though it's a well thought through campaign.
Oh, I know for a fact those aren't.
I would say it's been a bit more like a startup, actually, to be honest.
Yeah.
Sort of an idea that I suppose we put out there because we're passionate about it. I thought it was crazy. It started actually with me writing an opinion piece. I think it was for one of the trade press, maybe it was Marketing Week or something, just about how ridiculous the current situation was, because most people weren't aware of that. And actually, more importantly, what you could do about it. And it sort of developed from there, really. Yeah, a guy called Benedict Pringle got in touch with me after reading that. We met up for a coffee and decided to set it up. That was like over 8 years ago. Did we think it would take this long, or that actually we'd still be doing it now? Not at all. I think the one feature of getting this to happen is that you could call it tenacity or doggedness, I think. But actually, it's been every year, as we've been looking at the issue more, and actually as the issue's been developing through the development and acceleration of digital technology and now AI, it's just become more apparent to us how important and actually how much it is influencing democracy, and actually how important it is to do something about it. One of the things that really propelled it and actually got it going, I guess, was a report we did around the 2019 election, where the whole journey of the campaign in some ways has been about trying to dismantle some of the arguments of why it can't be done. And one of the sort of things that were talked about, I suppose, early on was, well, how big a problem is it? There's not many of these ads, are there? So we thought, okay, around the 2019 general election, we decided to document misleading ads that were running in the election, the Johnson landslide election, and put together quite a comprehensive report. And it was talked about on the James O'Brien show on LBC. I was invited onto that. And then it was picked up by the BBC as well. So we were on BBC Breakfast, 5 Live, the news channel, on the homepage of the BBC website for a couple of days. And that's when I think also the penny dropped as to, rather than us talking as advertising professionals, you start to see the general public and how infuriated the general public are with this sort of campaigning. David Putnam, who chaired the Democracy and Digital Technology Committee, chairs our campaign now, agreed to chair our campaign to try to get some of these extra recommendations implemented. He often describes a citizen consumer as being the subject of all of this. And it's very much a sort of cross between, from an advertising industry point of view, how crackers it all is, but actually just from a general public point of view, just how mad everyone is about it, actually, and how people want something to be done about it. And to be quite frank, when I looked around, there wasn't really anyone else volunteering to do it. And I don't think anyone else would have carried on doing it so long. So that's probably been another part of the factor that's kept it ongoing. You do have to be a bit of quite dogged about the whole thing, I suppose, and a bit like a dog with a bone, I think, really. That's probably what's kept going over the years.
And single-minded too, I imagine.
Yeah, I guess so. But it's quite, on a sort of human and personal note, it's really quite draining, I've got to say, running a campaign over that period of time. It's quite a thankless task, actually, which is why, actually, when it comes to a head and you actually see, that you've got quite a few MPs supporting this and taking it forward at the third reading of the bill. And then obviously there's the sort of next round after that, whether people decide, it should happen or not at this stage, then you get to start it all again in the House of Lords. So there's definitely been some quite tangible progress, I suppose, that feels like change is possible. But it's not an easy task, and there's no guarantees at the end of this that obviously it will happen.
What are the next steps for it?
So the third reading of the Representation of the People Bill is the 2nd or 3rd of September. Basically, that gets discussed again in the House of Commons. And then after that, as I said, it goes on to the House of Lords. And basically, the whole process starts again in the House of Lords. And you can get to a place during that where they call it ping pong, where things get sort of put back to the Commons and then back to the Lords to see if you can get your amendments through. So we're very much focused on, yes, this is very technical, isn't it? But the third reading, which is a time when MPs are going to talk about it again at the beginning of September. And we know there are various MPs across the parties that are going to talk about the topic. But then after that, yes, we're gearing up for the House of Lords as well.
And you have cross-party support for this, but I don't think that was always the case. Can you describe what that journey was like for some of the MPs and for some of the Lords as well?
It's always been pretty cross-party, actually. Yeah. So very grateful, actually, for the Green Party. So they were the first main party to officially support it. But when we've spoken to MPs across the political spectrum, we've had a lot of support. I suppose it's been a lot of the smaller parties supported it initially. And a lot of this is a bit of a snowball effect, I think, of gathering momentum and becoming better known, I think, and making our case in a better way. An example, actually, of the support that we had, that's another sort of point that sometimes was put to us. It was like, well, how much political support would there be for this? Obviously, you'd need some political support for this to happen. So we put together something called the Election Ad Review Panel that was to show basically that how a form of regulation could work in a similar setup to how ad regulation works in the UK for some of the local elections, and then we do run it again in the general election. And we had a panel of about 10 people as part of that was chaired by Lord Putman to demonstrate how it could all work. And then alongside that, in parallel, for the mayoral elections that were running the first time we piloted it, we put together an ad code that's now basically part of one of these amendments. And we approached mayoral candidates to see if they would sign up to it too. And again, like often when we do these things, you're not quite sure what's going to happen. But we were very surprised and very encouraged by getting quite a number, 6 or 7 of the London mayoral candidates to sign up to it, including London's Mayor Sadiq Khan. We had the Green candidate, the Liberal Democrat sign up to it. And then actually looking back on things, other notables, which is quite interesting. So we had Andy Burnham signed up to it, which is quite interesting to us when he was running for Manchester Mayor. Tracy Braden as well, and other people from Labour like Neil Kinnock and other notables supporting it too. So we did that specifically, again, just to sort of try and dismantle that point of like, is there enough support from it in the government or cross-party? And I think we've demonstrated that there is.
Just on that, Alex, I was going to ask you, I mean, did you say you've got 58 MPs at the moment signed up?
There's a number of different amendments we've got, but yeah, we've got between 37 and 58.
To be blunt about it, there are 650 MPs. So how confident are you that actually it will get through? And if it doesn't, what happens next?
If it doesn't, then we go on to the Lords. So at this stage, so that's how the process works. And it's been kind of interesting. We're not, and there's a tiny amount of people that work on this. Really, there's like a few of us, and we all do this. I think it's worth saying on your podcast, like it's politically neutral. So we're, if you look on all our reports, very much have no fear or favour across the parties and try to sort of approach everything with a very even hand. And we're not for profit as well and unfunded as well. So we all do this like as a sort of side hustle, I suppose, to our main jobs. But basically, yeah, like the government doesn't implement it and turns down some of the amendments, which is very likely actually in the third reading. Then the next stage is to go on to the Lords. So,
but obviously you've been doing this quite a while. It takes time to get these things in, and these is MPs effectively marking their own homework. So it's quite a difficult thing, I would think, in some ways, to sell to certain people.
In what sense? What do you mean? So yeah.
Well, in terms of you're talking about political parties having to make sure that what they're putting out is exactly the correct thing and having people check that. So these are people who are not necessarily used to people checking in that way. That everything that they're saying is accurate.
Yeah, I suppose so. I think the main obstacle really, from this, especially from a government point of view and a Labour point of view, is just getting on the priority list of just everything that needs to be done from a Labour point of view. I think, look, Andy Burnham signed up to this historically. So from a personal point of view, that would indicate he's got some sympathy with it. We've got a lot of support for it, but it's actually, especially with the new government, kind of thinking through now what they want to focus on, what their priorities are. Part of the campaigning challenge is trying to get cut through and, the sort of attention actually of key people to try to ensure that it gets onto that priority list. A sort of another flank, I suppose, of if I describe this as a bit of a battle, which I suppose it feels like sometimes, in this is the ad industry and getting support of the ad industry too. It's very sort of secondary, I think, obviously to the decision makers that are MPs, but very encouraged that there's been some good leadership shown over the last couple of months by different players in the ad industry. Claire will probably be familiar with some of these names, but your listeners might not. But we've had 2 very influential trade bodies over the last couple of weeks come behind it and support our amendments. One being the trade body for advertisers in the UK, ISBAR, and another one being a trade body called the IEB that represents digital advertising as well.
The IAB's behind it. That's big.
Yeah. The IEB, in fact, today has come forward with a quote supporting it.
That's amazing. For listeners, so ISBA, if you're a brand advertiser, so say you're Unilever, you're part of ISBA. If IAB doesn't just include brand advertisers, I think it also is included, is it chaired as well by some of the tech industry as well? So it's Meta.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. IAB's a mixed membership. It's a mix of publishers and ad tech platforms as well. So yeah, Google and Meta and some of the ad platforms are a part of that.
Yeah, and these are quite important supporters because a lot of the UK ad industry is self-regulated. So bodies like the ASA, the IAB are voluntary. A lot of our rules around advertising standards aren't actually legislation, it's voluntary code. But because publishers or ad space owners are members of it, you effectively can't advertise if you don't comply with the rules. So it's very, very, very strong self-regulation. It's one of those things that works really well in the UK generally, but when it's absent, you really notice it. I think AI being one of the one of the places where it is particularly absent.
To be honest, it's just common sense. Like if you talk to anyone on the street, anyone in the ad industry, you just sit down and talk about actually what we're trying to achieve here. To say it's a no-brainer is a bit of an understatement. But it's quite an interesting puzzle trying to get it to all happen. It's certainly been an interesting strategic challenge over the last couple of years thinking about how we do that. But, the tide's certainly beginning to turn. It's a very hard thing to get to happen, I think, actually, from a campaigning point of view. But really encouraged actually by, I think, people just deciding that this isn't too much of a hot potato to handle and actually something needs to be done about it. And I think, some of those different dynamics of the changing political landscape we've got at the moment and this sort of era of disinformation that we're descending further into really sharpens everyone's minds quite considerably. Like anyone that uses social media just has to look in their feed at the moment to see how much it's just, full of a lot of AI slop and an increasing amount of disinformation. This is just a part of the jigsaw puzzle. It's not the biggest bit, but I think it's got a bit of a bigger bit, actually, with the changing landscape that we've got. But very pleased and very grateful for those offering support to actually show some leadership by supporting the issue.
So that was Alex Tait from Reform Political Advertising. It was going to be a fascinating few months, I think, to see where exactly that ends up. You might have, I think, probably picked up on my slight skepticism, not about what he's doing, but about the process in which he's involved at the moment. I'm sure they're thinking about that as well. What happens if and when that doesn't get through Parliament? Claire, how important is this for trust, do you think, in politics and in our society?
I think massively important. And I also think it's been a turning point. So, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but one of the things that stood out to me when we were talking to Alex was exactly how much trust people place in information in the UK and how that fragile breaking point has been political advertising, right? Because like 99% of our information diet, really, in terms of advertising, in terms of receiving leaflets, anything that looks like advertising is truthful and factual. And we come to trust it. And when that's our experience with it, when something breaks it, we lose trust in that altogether. And so I think you can almost draw a line between the fact that our political advertising isn't trustworthy and politicians not being trustworthy. And if politicians are trustworthy, do you trust the government? Because what is the government, or the face of the government, or the voice of the government, but politicians? So these things go hand in hand. And I think this has been really hard to put through because it's kind of like turkeys voting for Christmas. Like, we'll put a link to it in the show notes. But I wrote an essay 10 years ago when I was doing the IPA's Excellence Diploma. Actually, what I wrote about was what advertising agencies could learn from political campaign strategists. More fool me! But I interviewed a lot of campaign strategists for that piece, and anonymously, so that they would tell me everything, and they did, and they had some great stuff in there. Like my personal favorite was, we call it a war room because it's a war.
Yeah,
and you get the word in between. But there was just a number of things they said. But one of the other things that they said was that when you work on an election campaign, you have a deadline. And your only job is to get past that deadline and to win. And it's zero sum. It's winner take all. There's no prize for second place in the UK. So you do things and say things that you wouldn't encourage a brand to do. In fact, that you would think any brand or anyone who wants to survive beyond election day should do, because it would break people's trust. And so it's one of those things we find ourselves in now where people's trust is broken. But I think beyond that, when I wrote that piece, that was 10 years ago, and I was talking to people who've been working in campaigns at that stage for over 10 years. So they started working in the early 2000s on political campaigns. The media environment has fundamentally changed since then. And it's gotten to the point where, we're in this cycle in the, this algorithmically driven media environment where sensationalism is everything, but it's also become very divisive. And, one of the things I saw when I I did go to one of the readings of the amendments for this bill, and the stories from the politicians of the personal effect that this change in media environment has had on them in the last few years, in their communities, with their families, about lies being spread about who they are, what their intent is. I think there's an assumption that this comes from rogue actors, and some of it does, but actually a lot of it comes from opposing campaigns. It's part and parcel of politics. And I think the assassinations as well in the last few years of Joe Cox, of David Amos, of Ann Widdecombe have really, really affected them to really it's really made politicians across the spectrum just stop and think it's come too far. We've gotten to the point now where when their lives are in danger, their families' lives are in danger, their communities are in danger, they can feel that tension and they can feel what it's doing all the time. That's the motivation to change this. So I'm more hopeful than you, because although it's turkeys voting for Christmas, actually it's not really that, because they're at the stage now where if it continues this way, they've now seen that the effects are both immediate, they're personal, and they're also, we're at breaking point. But even then, it's taken this long to get something that should be, it feels obvious, made law. But, here we are. It's how hard it is to make it work.
Let's just mention what we've got on the next episode, which is Claire Atkin from Check My Ads. We've already recorded that conversation. I haven't edited it yet, so I can't tell you exactly what's in it, because that's the way these things work. But again, fascinating, and talking about the way that ads affect our attention.
Yes, the way ads affect our attention, but also how that environment is subject to abuse and misuse as well. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in that conversation. I can't wait for it to go out as well. I think it's a really interesting counterpoint to this as well. And Claire's the campaign that Claire is running with her partners with Check My Ads, both in the United States and in the United Kingdom and Europe, to get advertisers to sign up to a code of practice that effectively limits the ability for ads to support mis and disinformation, and get, digital ad providers to adhere to certain standards to prevent that kind of fraud, is a really, really important piece of this puzzle. So yeah, looking forward to that.
And there is an outline, a possibility that after that you might hear an episode where you and I are in the same room for the first time in 20 years.
Yeah, for our listeners, we haven't been in person in 20 years.
No, we haven't. It's just the way it's worked. Yeah. But there you go. That might happen. That's all to come.
Oh, one more thing. So as this episode goes out, today is Wednesday, 19th of August. Tomorrow is Thursday, the 20th of August. I can count. Anyway, over the next 5 days, the South by Southwest panel picker is open, and I submitted a keynote to South by Southwest, and it's called 6 Ways to Save the Ad-Funded Internet, and it is currently in the panel picker submission portal. This episode is going out on Thursday, the 20th of August. That submission is open, I believe, until the 26th of August, but it might be the 25th. Anyway, there's a link in the show notes. Please go on and vote for the keynote, please. And you'll have my ever big thanks. Vote for Claire.